Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com, debatephysics.com, also video presentation. And so we're going to try again to communicate with some human life on the planet Earth and see if, we can find an honest man. Ooh. One who will say, yes, I understand that it is kind of silly for science to say it takes 100 times the energy to spin a motor 10 times as fast, or 25 times to spin it 5 times as fast. That's really not science. It's just stupid. And so I have found a website called a YouTube channel called Debunked, and they have a couple of videos about bullets, and they have other videos about other kinds of things, but nothing directly related to the real question. Does a car going, 100 miles an hour have, 4 times the energy of a car going 50 miles an hour? Or is it just reasonably understood to be twice the energy, twice the momentum, twice the ability to impose energy on something else, transfer? That the only thing you can transfer is momentum, and it's just a fact, and that there is no such thing as kinetic energy, but you can't transfer it. It's just kind of a silly nonsense, an old stupid idea. So it's a myth accepted by all of science, and some myth buster ought to just bust it, but none of them will. And it's just disappointing that you can't find any, interested party who wishes to, do the right thing and tell people the truth, that science has made some really big mistakes and they can't entirely be trusted. Okay, you can't take everything they say too seriously, because they are vulnerable to just silly ideas. So anyway, to the debunked guy. So, I used to do this in private, but I never got any responses from any of the people I asked to talk about the subject. So, I'll just do it publicly and kind of just make the point that it'd be nice if you would participate in a bit of a controversy about the actuality of this thing called the kinetic energy theorem, 1/2 mv squared, and the related nonsense of the work equation that says work is force times distance, when no, it's force times time. And you can even do the MGH thing, falling in gravity. So this has some of that in it, these videos. So I'll play some of the videos and hit a couple of the points, but I suppose the bigger argument is understanding the fact that their theory just doesn't produce any rational evidence. It's non-existent. Okay, in any real experiment, let's say one not contrived in very specific air track kind of circumstances, they can't get this to work. These simple things pointed out. So since we're on the subject of bullets, I'll do the ballistic pendulum real quickly, and but it's just a perfect illustration that it's not real energy. And so I could talk about space, and I could talk about thrust, and I could talk about lots of other things, and they would all point out that this doesn't make any sense. So you have the bullet, and you're going to just transfer its energy. So they did a video talking about how people don't really get pushed by gunfire. That all of these movie images of somebody being flung against the wall because they got shot is kind of nonsense, because there's not nearly enough energy in the bullet to move the big heavy human anywhere, and that any motion in the human will be spasms or just their motion of collapse, because they lose consciousness and faint. Anyway, so look, the simple truth is, as science says, okay, 1/2 mv squared says, that this bullet has 2,000 joules of energy, and that somehow when I capture that energy, that is its momentum, let's say it's 100, and so I can capture 98% of its momentum in a pendulum or a human or in some object where most of the energy stays going in this direction. Yeah, you lose some going this way and this way. You create some heat. You lose a little bit. But the substance of the energy goes into the ballistic pendulum. You conserve 98% of the MV, but you lose 99.94% of the KE. So somehow this number doesn't show up, and all you get over here is the 2 part. You don't get the 1,000, you just get the 2. And that's perfectly consistent with when the gun fired, okay, and you only have the 2 joules of energy, MV, in the gun's recoil. And again, what do you have over here? Equal and opposite reaction. You have really just 2 joules of energy. That's the truth. You don't have 2,000. The 2,000 is just this thing here, this crazy little wacky squared thing they put on the everything. Okay, so they've broken everything with this notion that somehow there's such a thing as a squared velocity, which geometrically you can understand can't make any sense. All right, and the other experiment that just demonstrates it's just a canard is the whole idea of, you could have a 5-ton train and a 10-ton train, and their theory says, the 5-ton train going twice as fast can do twice the work, yet they don't have a single piece of experimental evidence. And the evidence really points the other way around. I can take the 5 mass with the 10 velocity, and I can just add 5 mass to it very gracefully, and I can end up with the 10 mass, all right, just going 5v, and everything makes perfectly good sense. This experiment's been done over and over again. Again, you conserve, in this case, maybe 99.9% of the momentum. And again, you lose 1/2 the kinetic energy. Just gone. Disappears, because you really can't say, oh, it moved a bunch of other stuff, it broke a piece off and it flew over this way. You can't break a piece off and fly it over that way without energy. So this is exactly like the bowling myth. Okay, so physics says, right? There are physics books that say it. They're written by physicists, and they say this crap. They even advise bowlers that there's this advantage. You ought to figure out how to take advantage of it. Where if you have the 16-pound ball, going 8 miles per hour, let's say, or the 8-pound ball going 16 miles per hour, all right, that somehow you're much better off with this lighter ball. You'll do 2x the damage somehow to the pins. Somehow the pins, you'll knock down twice as many pins, or they'll go twice as fast if you use the 8-pound ball. Yet there's no theory for it. I mean, if you try to calculate pin by pin where the energy goes, I mean, it's just a transfer of momentum. Whatever momentum the pin leaves with, the bowling ball lost exactly that much momentum, that much velocity to account for that much momentum. So the only thing being lost is MV here. And so clearly it's just the squared function means that, yes, of course, if you start off with a higher V number and it's squared, you're going to pretend you have more you have more energy, but you don't. All you have is the MV. You don't have the MV squared. And that's all that really is going to work in a bowling alley. And the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, that no professional bowler does anything close to this 8-pound ball. They don't use a 15, they don't use a 14, they don't use 13, 12. They don't take advantage of any of the increase in energy that they could muster if they threw a lighter ball. And you have to ask the question, well, it is just a myth then, isn't it? It doesn't really have anything to do with the truth. And it should be, since it's a scientific myth, a myth held by scientists, that's the kind you really should debunk. I mean, the myths held by, common morons, Jesus walked on water or something, those you almost shouldn't bother with because they're like silly. But this is what science says. So this is the kind of myth you ought to debunk. This is the kind of corrosive, destructive to intelligence kind of stuff that you really should pay some attention to. that would be my request, is that you pay some attention and realize that there's just no good evidence that it, in fact, takes 100 times the energy to spin a motor 10 times faster, or even 4 times the energy to spin it twice as fast. So let's play some of this. So this is about bullets, and so they're entertaining videos, comical, whatever you want to say. So yeah, that's something you got to do on the internet, I guess.
Cause as much internal damage as possible, and kill you. Ranged weapons utilize high kinetic energy focused on a small area at the...
Right, so you're saying, I sort of could debunk you by saying, well, what do you mean it has high kinetic energy? What does the kinetic energy mean? If it actually had the 2,000 joules of energy and it hit the human being with 2,000 joules of energy, 2,000 watts, yeah, you could argue it could actually do something. It could actually push a human being. It could actually move them. But the truth is the momentum is what you're conceding is all it can absorb. It can't absorb this kinetic energy stuff. You're not going to transfer 2,000 joules of energy. You're just going to transfer 2.
Tip of the bullet, enabling penetration of the skin and access to your fragile gooey.
Yes, exactly. So it's concentrated the energy into a small location and at a high velocity. That is, the energy is going in very quickly, so if the object can't absorb quick motion, it just breaks. So I could break a spring by hitting it with a bullet. I can just snap the steel because I hit it with energy that's too fast for the steel to accept. So it snaps instead of bending or stretching. So yeah, bullets have an advantage, but that's it. It's just an advantage, a circumstantial advantage. They don't have 1,000 times more energy than the recoiling gun. Now he'll sort of point this out later in this video when he talks about, well, if you did make a gun that could actually knock some other person over, then it would knock you over as the shooter. So he's basically conceding that somehow it's the momentum that's doing all the work and the kinetic energy is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. It's not doing anything. So, why not take that simple observation and say, well, yeah, so let's just prove that. Let's go out and try to find an experiment where kinetic energy actually does work, where I take something that has the same momentum, 2 things that have the same momentum, a gun recoil and a bullet, and somehow show where the bullet actually does heat more water or actually does do more work. It can move more matter in the universe.
Insides. Indeed, bullets are so deadly specifically because they are small lumps of relatively hard metal with relatively little mass, making them fantastic at flying through the air at high speed.
Right, so yes, one atom moving 1,000 miles an hour is probably going to penetrate a substance a lot easier than 1,000 atoms moving 1 mile an hour. But it isn't going to change the fact that they're going to bang into and transfer energy exactly in the same amount total. It's going to be the same amount of stuff moving after the impact of either one.
Before ripping through your much softer biological matter. However...
Alright, so let's move on further down. Oh, let's go here, say.
It's far less fatal. Perhaps unsurprisingly, there actually has been some academic interest in this popular movie cliché, and for quite a long time too. In 1996, an article published in the International Journal of Legal Medicine assessed the physics of the displacement of the human body upon being shot full of proverbial lead. It states that
the maximum momentum transferred from different small arms.
So exactly. So it just talks about the momentum because it must concede that the kinetic energy doesn't have any effect. Just like in space, your thrust you could take smaller particles and move them fast, or you can take big particles and move them slow, and it really just doesn't matter. The only thing that's going to matter is the momentum, not some fake notion of kinetic energy. So if I throw the bullet out one side of the spaceship and I throw the gun out the other side of the spaceship, my spaceship isn't going to turn. Even though I have 2,000 watts going out one side and only 2 watts going out the other side, and there's every good reason to say, well, how could that be equal? There's good reason to say, how could that possibly be equal? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I should turn. And if I don't turn, I've proven kinetic energy is fallacious. It's nonsense. It's a silly little fable. It's been told for 300 years now. And, the little scientists sit in their cribs and go goo goo gaga, feed me more nonsense. But that's all it is. It's an absolute nonsense. It was invented by a kind of a nutty scientist. And then it was supported through little gimmicky experiments, nothing dramatic, no car crashes, no real experiments, just little gimmick experiments. And that's its history. It's junk science. And some other human besides me should have enough brains to say, well, we probably should debunk junk science.
Projectiles, including large caliber rifles and a 12-gauge shotgun, only results in a backwards motion of an 80 kilogram target body of 0.01 to 0.18 meters per second.
Yeah, so almost no velocity. Yeah. So that's the truth, right? It's very little energy got transferred. So the 2,000 joules just didn't happen, and all the person really encountered was the 2 part, the gun recoil. They got the same thing that the shooter got in terms of an impact energy. And they ought to just admit the truth. So he actually does admit the truth here. So once we get past some of this crap, then he goes to the bigger bullet idea.
By even the most powerful firearms ranges from minimal to pretty much negligible.
And the physics issues don't stop there.
So you're saying the word physics, and again, you're kind of playing a game with it, right? You're you're using the word kinetic energy as if you're measuring kinetic energy, but you're really not, because it really doesn't do anything, so you can't really count it as anything because it doesn't really work. It doesn't move matter.
Indeed, if you're enjoying learning about this sort of topic, intertwining science and...
Oh dear, so this is a commercial. Okay, so, fuck. Alright, so, look, there we go. Newton's cradles are cool. Why don't you do some of those experiments? Because they have some wacky theory, that you can have a 1 mass go in, and it can move a 3 mass and give it 150% of the momentum it had. So it can increase the momentum for free, going in a direction. That's what physics says.
Namely, Isaac Newton's third law.
See, there you go. What's the point of having Isaac Newton's third law? Now, Isaac Newton didn't believe in mv squared. So Isaac Newton's third law was written about momentum. And clearly, in the gun example, everything works just fine. The bullet has the same momentum as the gun recoil. You obey the third law. But if you use kinetic energy, you're clearly not obeying the third law, but somehow you have 2,000 watts going one way, and you only have 2 watts of energy going the other way. I mean, horsepower, whatever you want to convert it into, calories, it doesn't matter. Quantity of energy. You have this gigantic quantity of energy going one way, and this tiny, minimal amount of energy going the other way. How is that obeying Newton's third law? Obviously, it isn't. So, you shouldn't pretend you have any respect for Newton when you do this to him. Newton would oppose the science you're stating.
Or of motion, which famously asserts that for every action, there is an equal and opposite.
Except there isn't, right? So I go in with 100 momentums and a small object. I hit a big heavy object, and all of a sudden I have 150. Because they have to conserve the kinetic energy. To conserve the kinetic energy, they have to give the object a nonsense amount of energy, a momentum. So the whole thing, again, is nonsense. Newton was right, physics is wrong.
Reaction. This isn't usually a huge problem when firing a regular gun, as the gun itself has considerably more mass than the bullet it is propelling, and is also...
Yes, 1,000 times the atoms, okay, moving, 1,000 times slower. But it's still a significant, gun recoil is still real. it has to be absorbed. It's real energy. It's substantial. And I'd say it's more than 2 joules. These are the estimates they make. It does seem like it's a little bit more than 2 sticks of butter falling 1 meter, but whatever.
Equipped with a nifty little handle, which makes absorbing recoil fairly easy. However, if there were a firearm capable of blowing enemies...
So here you go. So he's conceding the argument. The kinetic energy has nothing to do with it, and that the whole thing is just about momentum. So why are you using the word kinetic energy when you're not analyzing its kinetic energy?
Into the air, Newton's pesky third law dictates that it would exert the exact same amount of force on the person firing it.
So it doesn't make any sense to say Newton's law says it's the same amount of force, yet your other theory says, your 1/2 mv squared clearly states, okay, that the bullet has 2,000 joules and the gun recoil is only 2. So it's clearly stating that they aren't equal. So, there's all kinds of bustability in your busting, okay? Your debunking is debunkable.
Meaning that even if you could create such a weapon, the user would necessarily be blown off their feet as well. Not ideal. So, it's fair to say...
Okay, so it's fair to say, this is kind of a garbage video because you really aren't doing science. It is science in the sense that they all say it. But it's not science in that it doesn't really have anything to do with being rational and honest and telling the truth or any of that kind of stuff. Newton opposed the kinetic energy theory. For 40 years he opposed it. It happened during his lifetime, okay? And the fact is his opposition worked because the guy who invented it, nobody even showed up, to say goodbye. And Newton was buried as, frankly, a god. And so he did win the argument while he was alive. And after he was dead, all you silly people ran off and did all kinds of silly crap. Kind of like whatever. After Moses died, people went all crazy. Something like that. All right, so here's this one about shooting a bullet in the air. So we have a lot of the same kind of dynamics in the sense of you're talking about really just the acquisition of energy. And the fact is with bullets, okay, there's still substantial mass, but the fact is the air does really slow down a bullet. So the launch velocity will not be the landing velocity. You won't get back what you shot into the air because there's going to be air resistance both ways. You're not only not going to go as high as you should go if there was no if there was no atmosphere, you'd go forever, but gravity would still slow you down. And it would give you back exactly what gravity took. So, if there was no air resistance, you could shoot bullets a substantial height into the troposphere or whatever. And they would, again, falling down, would gain tremendous amounts of velocity because they wouldn't run into terminal velocity. They wouldn't run into a big pile of air below them that they can't compress any more than they've compressed it. So, so most of what they say here is true, but, might as well do the gravity part where, he does the silly crap where he shows 9.8 meters per second squared, but he says 9.8 meters per second. So he shows one thing and he says the more rational thing, which is a little bit funny. Well, it's a little tragic too, but it's funny, tragic. It's tragic that nobody, to just imagine that no one, none of you people could sit there and, watch this stuff and say, well, is there some point where it just doesn't quite make sense? 25 times the gas to go 5 times faster? That just doesn't make any sense. Come on. You have to know that doesn't make any sense.
The moment it leaves the chamber. At this point, the bullet is at its maximum velocity and has its maximum kinetic energy. From this point...
So he said it again, right? It has its magical maximum kinetic energy, but we already know that the kinetic energy doesn't do anything. Can't knock a person over. Okay, so what exactly does it mean? Why should kinetic energy be of at all interest if it can't actually do any work? It's not going to make the bullet go higher. It's not going to make the bullet do anything. It's not going to make it fight the wind better. None of that stuff's going to happen. There's absolutely no evidence that it's going to do any better than any other object with the same momentum. So if I could shove the same momentum, I can make the same size bullet out of a heavier mass. It's not going to change anything. You'll say it has less kinetic energy, but it really won't. It'll have the same momentum.
Downward forces from gravity and air resistance begin to slow the bullet's ascent. The bullet reaches its highest point when...
So I guess they should sort of just show it as being a bunch of compressed air, okay? You're just compressing air. The air ends up not it's a mass you're moving, so the bullet in a sense is getting heavier because it's got a bunch of compressed air above it that is heavier than the air below it, you could argue, and so it's it's being slowed down by air pressure, more air pressure above than below.
Its kinetic energy has been transferred to heat and gravitation.
So more bullshit about any transfer. No, the transfer is entirely momentum. So it's losing its momentum. It's losing its velocity because it's giving little other things velocity. Little air molecules and other stuff are being given the velocity. And so for every piece of mass it gives velocity to, it has to lose some of its velocity to do that.
Potential energy. Here, its velocity is 0. The only force now being exerted on the bullet is gravity, which pulls the bullet back to Earth at a velocity...
Doesn't pull it, it pushes it, but again, I guess you can't debunk that one yet, because it's invisible and we can't see which way it goes, but the fact is there's, gravity's coming from the outside and pushing in, but whatever.
Which increases by 9.81 meters...
There you go. So... listen to what he says versus what he has written there, right? He has per second squared for whatever silly reason, but he's not going to say that.
Which increases by 9.81 meters per second every second.
Every second, yes. So he says it the right way, So every second you're letting it fall, it's gaining 9.8 meters of velocity, but that's it. That's all that's happening. There's no squaring of anything. You're just saying how many seconds did it fall, and that'll tell you how many 9.8s it got. And you just total up the 9.8s, and you'll know how much velocity it got. And the catch being, though, in atmosphere, there'll be a point where it's not going to gain anymore. Okay, so terminal velocity will take place. It will create too much air pressure. The air pressure will oppose any gains from gravity. So 9.8 meters of air pressure, more coming from the bottom than from the top, will end gravity's ability to add to your velocity. So all you got is what you collected before as a velocity, and gravity can't give you any more because there's a constant 9.8 of the Earth essentially pushing back up, the atmosphere pushing back up. So you've essentially hit the ground. You just don't know it yet. I mean, it's kind of funny, right? You've essentially hit the ground. You can't gain any more velocity, but the ground isn't quite capable of taking the velocity you already got away yet, because you haven't hit the heavy part of the ground. But in a way, yes, you're already done gaining velocity.
As the bullet accelerates downwards, its velocity increases, as does the air resistance. And when a bullet falls naturally...
Right, so you lost energy to air resistance on the way up, and now you're losing energy on the way down, so obviously the bullet's going to not have the same velocity when it hits the ground. But it's still enough velocity to, knock a hole in your head.
It will often spin and tumble in the air, further increasing its air resistance and slowing its acceleration significantly. When gravity and air resistance balance out, the bullet will hit its terminal velocity, meaning it will no longer go any faster. The question is, are bullets falling at this speed still dangerous?
Well, the terminal velocity of a falling bullet will obviously vary depending on the type of bullet. But, generally speaking, yes, very much.
I think it also has something to do with the bullet spin. So the point is, if you shoot the bullet up, it'll stop spinning too. And that's the part where, you know, it's going to now wobble a lot more. And if you shoot it sideways, the advantage is it keeps its angular rotation, its angular momentum.
So, but before we get into that, we'd like to introduce you to Atlas View.
Oh dear, another one of these hour-long commercials. So I think we're done anyway, right? We did the Newton part. That was the only important part. So now he's just going to show about shooting bullets, you know, the arc argument. And there is a difference. So you'll keep more of your muzzle velocity if you shoot at some angle that's not straight up. So the less straight up the angle is, the more muzzle velocity you retain.
On falling bullets, and found that a 30 caliber round can reach terminal velocities of 90 meters per second.
Right, so it's not that high, right? I mean, if humans are 100 miles an hour, which is, well, I have to think about that one. You know, but yes, humans don't go, I mean, they stop going fast at a pretty slow speed, frankly. I mean, certainly it's not, you know, you would think that falling out of an airplane would be worse than crashing into a building at 100 miles an hour, but it's really about the same thing. You know, it's not going to make much of a difference. You going 100 miles an hour and hitting a non-movable surface, and that'll be about what does take place. So what you need is an airbag, maybe a really, really good airbag.
Or just over 200 miles per hour. According to forensic science,
Say 200 miles an hour is, you know, it's pretty fast.
Dr. B.N. Matu, a 30 caliber round can break through skin while travelling at speeds as low as 37 meters per second, or 85 miles per hour.
So yes, plenty of, you know, room for error, margin for error. So yes, you will kill people. All right, so the rest of the video is just pointing out how, hey, guess what? Statistically, it actually kills more people from falling bullets than sideways bullets, because of the obvious thing that the bullets coming from straight up and down tend to hit you in the head. And it's easier to kill somebody if you shoot them in the head. All right, so enough stated, I think. Yeah, maybe I'll think if there's some other little quick example I could, you know, I don't know if this guy's going to even bother watching this whole video and all that stuff, so it's really a rough racket I'm in to get people to pay attention. But, you know, there's just so many arguments that can be made that illustrate that kinetic energy theory, 1/2 mv squared, has no reality. It doesn't work. It doesn't get right answers. MGH doesn't get right answers. 4 pounds dropped 1 foot, not the same energy as 1 pound dropped 4 feet. It's not true. All right. Yeah, maybe that's just enough. So hopefully we can get him to take an interest in the subject and debunk the real dangerous fable makers, the scientists. Their fables are so much more dangerous than, you know, the silly fables of the silly fucktards, you know, who, whatever. You know, have their dog bite the ticks off of them or something, you know. Some kind of crap like that. So, till the next time, such, and so forth and whatnot. Yeah, that's enough of a video. Yeah. So the channel is Debunked, so at least that's a nice easy name. And sorry, if you're going to take the name Debunked, right, if you're going to have that really cool name title, you really should have you do have a responsibility to do it well. And you know, and you're probably running out of subjects, right? I mean, after a year of making videos, you're probably running out of cool subjects. So, you know, this is a good one. Trust me. Debunk the kinetic energy theory, and you know, you will get lots of views. Anyway, till the next time and such. I mean, they'll throw rocks at you too, but you know. Anyway, till the next time, such. Yeah, really, I'm done. Okay. Years of this. I mean, really, literally years to debunk just a silly story that science tells. I mean, it's a silly story. It doesn't make any sense. It's just stupid. I mean, I could, let me do the little Newton's cradle one. Just, again. So we know this works, right? We know what goes in comes out mostly, and it gets killed, blah, blah, blah. And so their theory is that if I do this and I glue these little fellas together, all three of them fly off on this side with, if I dropped with 100 momentum, I'll get 150 fly out this way, and this one will come back with 50. And then those two things will crash into each other. So I'll have a total of 200 momentum coming in, a car crash with 200, 150 plus 50, and I'll end up with only 100 coming out. It's stupid. Come on. Jesus. Years. Okay. Just a fact. I do hate this planet. I just hate being among you people. Hate it. Can't stand the sight of you, the smell of you, the look of you. Can't just can't stand it here. Ugh. Fuck. It's a bug planet.